I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways to communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can also use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter or give us a phone call. Leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. I want to start by taking you back to September of 2020. Don't worry, we'll return to the present in just a moment. But back then, historic wildfires tore through Oregon. It took a few days for firefighters to even begin to figure out just how much it burned. Here's the moment we first learned about the hardest hit areas from Governor Brown.
Early reports indicate that the towns of Detroit in Central Oregon, Blue River and Vida in Lane County, and Phoenix and Talent in Southern Oregon are substantially destroyed.
I covered that news conference. That was devastating to just hear that. Those towns have all been rebuilding in the year and a half since. Now, one of them is playing a big part in the World Athletics Championships that are coming to Oregon next month. Christine Pitawanich visited Vida to see how they're preparing.
We're here in the beautiful McKenzie River Valley, about 30 miles east of Eugene, in the small town of Vida. Wildfire tore through this area in 2020. This community is really in all stages of rebuilding, but as it continues to rebuild and recover, something exciting is on the horizon for this area. This gorgeous, state-of-the-art 8-lane certified track in Vida will be hosting the Irish team as they prepare to run in the Oregon 22 World Athletic Championships.
For the Irish to come here, we are honored. My name's Cliff Richardson, and I've basically lived up here on the McKenzie all my life. I'm a third-generation person up here.
For people like Cliff Richardson, having the opportunity to showcase the McKenzie River Valley is something special. It's been a hard couple of years after the holiday farm fire devastated this area. Richardson's wife, Connie, took this video.
You can look 360 around us. This was all on fire.
While there are still many challenges, especially around housing, recovery is underway.
There's green grass growing on the hillsides, and it's just a really good feeling to see it come back.
On the rebound is also excitement and hope, with news that the small town of Vida will be hosting the Irish team for the Oregon 22 World Athletics Championships.
My name is Michael Bergman, and I'm the vice president of the McKenzie Community Track, but also the president of the Portland Track Organization.
And Michael Bergman is the man behind the mission here in Vida. About 2 years ago, he reached out to Oregon 22, Travel Oregon, and then began reaching out to individual teams on his own to coordinate housing.
I've talked to Sweden, the Czech Republic. I see the value of popping up track meets in rural communities that can be welcoming and really take ownership in it. You know, I called myself the Airbnb for tracks.
During our meeting, Bergman took an important call from Ireland.
I'm at the track. Here, I'll switch it to video call. Let me see it.
The intent to show David, who handles logistics for the Irish team, the facilities here. We got a chance to hop on the call too.
How are you feeling coming all the way from Ireland to our little community here in Oregon?
Of course the team is excited. I mean, the World Championships is a massive event, and you know, it's from what athletes know, it's called Tracktown USA, and you know, McKenzie's a little ways down the way from Tracktown, but they're excited to get there and you know, put some good work in ahead of what could be a busy summer.
Leading up to Oregon 22, the team's days will be spent running on this track and resting here, 10 minutes up the road.
We are putting them up at the McKenzie camp, which is a former USA basketball academy. There's 6 lodges, some cabins, full cafeteria, commercial kitchen.
We're working with their staff and working with the menus to try to create really healthy choices.
It has everything.
Bergman hopes hosting the Irish will bring jobs and help give this community a boost.
Just a phenomenal opportunity for the entire community.
Back at the track, this place holds a deeper meaning for Richardson and dozens of others. Not only did it survive the fire, it helped people survive.
My wife and I, this was our anniversary here, surrounded and trapped by the fire. So us and about 35 neighbors or so were literally trapped here. We couldn't go east or west.
But they survived, and so did the McKenzie River Valley.
It's been ravaged by the fire, but before the fire it was, and it still is beautiful. And we're out here in paradise, what we consider to be our paradise. And to show it off to the world and the team from Ireland, we're very excited.
In Vida, Christine Pitawanich, KGW News.
Welcome to the Irish. Hey, it's nice that the sun is finally shining outside, starting to actually feel a little bit more like summer. Multnomah County tells us they are preparing for hotter weather with lessons learned from last year's devastating heat dome. Remember that? It arrived June 26, nearly a year ago, with a high of 108 degrees, and it just got worse from there. 72 people died from the heat in Multnomah County alone. The good news, the county plans to create more cooling shelters than before and spread them out. This summer, there will be as many as 18 centers, and they'll hold up to 200 people. And when they are open, bus rides to the shelters will be free for people who cannot afford it, and the drivers are going to be helping out.
We also, since last winter, have worked on a system where we actually build a paper map of the cooling center locations and provide those to TriMet drivers so that they'll also have access to that information right on hand.
Now, for the bad news. For those of you who do not have air conditioning and cannot escape the heat this coming weekend, the county is telling me today probably they are not hot enough, long enough this weekend to open those cooling centers. Here's how they decide. Multnomah County Health uses this page from the National Weather Service to start its decision-making process. It's the Weather Service's experimental heat risk map. The risk is coded with colors. The upper left is where you can choose a day. This shows Thursday in yellow for Oregon, so that means low risk. When you click on Friday, we see some orange in the Portland area. That shows moderate risk for folks who are sensitive to the heat. Saturday reveals a lot more orange in Oregon and a tiny spot of red in the Portland area. Sunday then shows red for the Portland area. That means high risk for much of the population, especially those who are sensitive to heat. But then on Monday, it's back to moderate risk. And Tuesday, it's back to low risk. And that's why the county is not planning to open cooling shelters as of right now. They say it's just not going to be hot enough, long enough. When you see lots of red and magenta on those maps, that's the hottest, and that's when shelters likely will open. By the way, we've posted a link to that heat risk map at kgw.com, so you can check it out anytime you want. It's in our main heat story. Speaking of weather, let's put our science caps on. Yesterday was the first day of summer and the longest day of the year, but check it out. Even though we have had so much daylight right now, we usually don't get our hot temperatures until later in the summer when the days are actually shorter. Why is that? Well, let's bring in the expert, our chief meteorologist, Matt Zaffino, to explain.
Thanks so much, Pat. You know, it's a really interesting question, and one that comes up every year. And as you mentioned, summer started Monday night, actually Tuesday morning. So we'll revisit this map about the seasons. And here we are at the summer solstice, basically, and at that time of year, at this time of the year, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. So we're getting the most direct rays of the sun as we do all year long. That, of course, means we have our longest days, as you mentioned, but it also means the sun angle is highest, which is key for heating. So this is where we are, the summer solstice, sun directly above the Tropic of Cancer, even though that was yesterday, close enough still. We're getting 16 hours and 40 minutes of daylight right now here in the Portland area. Of course, up in the Arctic Circle, it's 24 hours of daylight. So why, you ask the question, why is it not the hottest time of the year? We've got the highest sun angle, we've got the longest days, that's all happening right now. And yet, if you look at our average high temperatures and most of the hottest temperatures on record, taking last year out because that happened in June, right around the solstice. But most of the really hot temperature records in Portland and the highest averages occur in late July and early August when the sun angle isn't as high and the days aren't quite as long. Well, why is that, right? The question is, or the answer rather is, it takes time for the heating to occur. This is called the seasonal lag. So we get this really intense heating right now. That heat is absorbed by the land and then it's turned around and re-radiated out to space, and we feel the hot weather. But it takes time for everything to warm up like that. Think of it this way. If you put a kettle of water on your stove and you crank that stove all the way up to high, the water isn't instantly hot like that, right? It takes time for that kettle to start to whistle for Pat to have his chamomile tea. So it's just a function of time. It takes time for the heating to happen. We see that not only with the seasons, we see it on a daily basis too. Our hottest time of the day is usually about 5 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock in the afternoon, but we're getting the most intense incoming solar heating around local noon. Same thing with the ocean as well. The hottest time of the year for the oceans is typically late summer, September even. Yet the most intense heating that we're getting is happening now. That's why hurricane season peaks in September, because that's when we typically have the warmest water. So yes, we're getting the most intense heating and the longest amount of heating right now, but it takes time for the earth or the ocean to absorb that heat and turn it around. And that's why we've got what we call the seasonal lag. Pat?
I'll be darned, Matt. I mean, I always knew that it got hotter in September, or actually in August, but I didn't know why.
Yeah.
And now I know why. Thanks.
Intuitively, you understand it and you know it, but I think the analogy with the tea kettle is best, because everybody can relate to that. You don't just, turn up the heat and suddenly you have a pot of hot water. It takes time for that water to absorb the heat. And think of it this way. It's like you crank up that heat and then you gradually turn it down. It's going to take even a little bit longer for that tea kettle to heat up.
I think if you ever get tired of weather, you could be a great physics teacher at college or anywhere, Matt.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is all about physics and it's fun. Physics can be fun.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Last month, we met a Portland woman named Daria who worked as a supervisor at Rite Aid during the day and slept in a shelter at night.
I don't look like I'm homeless, but I am.
Now she's finally gotten into affordable housing.
Welcome to my crib.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. You know, we often hear stories of frustration and heartbreak surrounding the homeless, but tonight, Kyla Boshi brings us some good news. One of the women we featured in the KGW documentary, One Day, just got a new place to call home. Here's Kyle.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
When we first met Daria Anderson, it was the beginning of a new day.
You don't understand, this shelter is a royal palace for me. Even though we are sleeping in a mat, I call this a twin bed. Not a mat, but a twin bed.
The 65-year-old explained how she spent nights sleeping in a shelter before heading off to work, first thing in the morning.
I work for Rite Aid and I'm a floor supervisor. That is a regular 9-to-5 job. I don't look like I'm homeless, but I am.
Daria hoped by saving up she could eventually move into an apartment. Well, 2 weeks ago, that dream became a reality.
Okay.
She'd been on a waiting list to get into affordable housing.
Come on in here. Welcome to my crib. And we still unpacking.
After appearing in the KGW documentary One Day, Daria said many of her longtime customers came forward anxious to help.
Nobody knows I was homeless until they saw me on TV. He said, Daria, is that you? I said, yes, that's the One Day documentary.
Most importantly, Daria said, someone helped pay her first and last month's rent. That's what she needed to get into an apartment. She can cover the rest, her monthly rent.
I cried for about a couple of days. I couldn't sleep over here. I just been looking around 4 walls, and then I said, holy cow, this is an apartment.
The 2-bedroom apartment in Northwest Portland gives Daria and her son, who's disabled, some much-needed stability. It's a safe place to call home. Plus, they don't have to pack up and leave every morning like the shelter.
We can just stay here. We can just sleep in. That's a relief.
The documentary One Day captured the street-level response to Portland's homeless crisis during a 24-hour period. We chronicled the struggle that unfolds day in and day out for those experiencing homelessness and those providing support. For many, including Daria, one of the greatest challenges is a lack of affordable housing.
Nobody can afford $1,500 for a studio, making $15 an hour. No, count it. Your health insurance, if you're driving or using a TriMet, you still have to pay for a lot of things. With $15 an hour, that's not enough money.
Daria hopes other people experiencing homelessness will be inspired by her story. So one day, they too can get the help they need and a place to call home.
I want them to see the story that if I can do it, so can they.
Kyle Aboshi, KGW News.
Gotta love that. Hey, if you haven't already, be sure to watch KGW's One Day documentary. Our team of journalists captured more than a dozen stories over a single day that show the scope and impact of Portland's homeless crisis. You can watch One Day right now on KGW.com or on our YouTube page.
It would be difficult for him to give a reasonable, plausible story as to why he needed to kill this person that he was physically much bigger and stronger than.
A new episode of KGW's True Crime podcast, Should Be Alive, is out today. The podcast examines the 2019 murder of a transgender teenager from Vancouver named Nikki Kuhnhausen. Episode 5 takes us inside the courtroom for the 2021 murder trial of David Bogdanov. Prosecutors allege Bogdanov strangled Kuhnhausen with a cell phone cord when he discovered that she was transgender. Bogdanov claimed that Nikki attacked him and that he was simply acting in self-defense.
You used an iPhone charging cord to strangle Nikki, correct?
Yes.
When you found out that she was transgender, you were furious.
I wasn't furious, I was more of shocked at being deceived.
So you were upset that you'd been deceived?
Of course, who wouldn't be? What straight male wouldn't be in that kind of a situation?
So you called her a disgusting piece of shit.
For deceiving me.
You said something along the lines of, what the f***, you disgusting piece of shit.
Yes.
You'll also hear from a juror who opens up about what it was like to sit on the jury during this murder trial and how the jury narrowly avoided a mistrial. Episode 5 of Should Be Alive is available now wherever you get your podcasts. The final episode will come out next Wednesday. Still ahead, I think we all pretty much know how the state of Washington got its name, but did you know this? Not everyone on board liked the idea. We'll dive into the history books when the story continues. On Monday, we're taking our show on the road to Vancouver. We're going to be live on the Vancouver waterfront with our whole show focused on issues in Clark County. I hope that you'll watch. In the meantime, before we head up to Washington, let's get a little history lesson with another edition of What's in a Name. This is one of my favorite ongoing segments where Devin Haskin gives us a history lesson on certain local places and how they got their name. You probably guessed that Washington was named after the country's first president, but it turns out that name was not everyone's first choice.
The Evergreen State is more than just green, from rolling wheat fields to snow-capped mountains and surrounded by nature. Washington was the first and only to be named for a president.
I think Washington is beautiful.
1851 is where it all begins. Just 3 years after the Oregon Territory was established, settlers north of the Columbia wanted to separate.
Essentially, the reason why they wanted to split was they lacked representation.
That's Jennifer Kilmer, director of the Washington State Historical Society.
The settlers who were settling north of the Columbia River wanted services.
2 conventions called the Cowlitz and Monticello conventions would take place over the next couple years. The Cowlitz one decided on a name. And if you're thinking it's Washington, that's a little later in the story.
They wanted it to be Columbia Territory. Yeah. And, I think naturally that just came from the dividing line with the Columbia River.
Makes sense. Then a year after that, during the Monticello Convention, delegates drafted a memorial and fired it off to Congress, asking to establish the Columbia Territory. Oregon's territorial governor Joseph Lane and the legislature even giving it a thumbs up. So on March 2nd, 1853, Congress passed the bill creating the new territory. But not everyone liked the name.
So they say they want Columbia, and there's a representative from Kentucky who says, that'll be way too confusing because we already have District of Columbia. And actually at that time it was called the Territory of Columbia.
So for various reasons, U.S. legislators proposed Washington after the first president. And as any resident of Washington will tell you, that's not confusing to anyone.
I mean, if you say you're from Washington, they will assume that you are from Washington, D.C.
Washington remained the territory's name, and you'd think the story ended here. But wait, there's more. During a lecture in 1885 to the American Geographical Society, prominent lawyer David Dudley Field II proposed that instead of naming places after famous people, they should be changed to native names. So in a path to statehood,
he says we should name it the state of Tacoma.
That obviously was denied because on November 11th, 1889, this telegram was sent from the Secretary of State saying, the president signed the proclamation declaring Washington to be a state in the Union. It was the 42nd state admitted. And that's what's in a name.
Yeah, I love those. Now you know. Keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. We're going to read some of your emails right after this. Last night we told you about land acknowledgements. Those are the statements that some groups make to admit the land that we're on now was occupied by Native Americans before our ancestors forced them off it. Native American leaders told me the statements are fine as long as they're backed up by action and work with local tribes. But they are not fine if they're just words. A lot of you had a lot of comments on that story. Ann wrote in to say, "Hi Pat, thanks for doing the story about this. I had the same question when I heard these acknowledgements, and it was good to hear what Native American leaders had to say. I like the suggestion at the end about voting our values and about taking care of the land." Paul added, "As it so happens, I am in the midst of writing a land acknowledgement for the church that I attend right now. Your story was very timely, and I take to heart the advice I heard from the Native American leaders you featured. Thank you." You're welcome, Paul. And Marcel emailed this. "Organizations are made of people. Every one of those people that want to virtue signal about land acknowledgements have the capacity to return their property to Indigenous peoples." And Richard sent me this clipping from 2018. It's a release from the United Methodist Church. They actually did give some land back, about 1.5 acres of Wallowa River property near Wallowa Lake in northeastern Oregon. The land was the historic homeland of the Nez Perce. The church bought about 100 acres there back in the 1920s, and in 2018, they gave that portion of the riverfront land back to the tribe. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we're asking you to donate to Native American Youth and Family Center, or NAYA. They're a nonprofit serving the Native American community in the Portland metro area. They offer programs for families like camps, college and career fairs, early childhood programs, and foster care services. If you'd like to help out, just hold your phone's camera up to the QR code right there on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. We spoke with their chief operating officer about the work they do.
There's so many things you can benefit from at NAYA. You want to buy a home? We have a program for that. You need affordable housing? We have a program for that. You want to be a foster parent? We have a program for that. Hey, you want to start your own family? We have a program for that. We have a program for just about everything, and yet we're still growing because we do have a very diverse urban Native community. There's folks from over 300 tribes, well over 300 tribes in 1 year. A few years back, we documented that we had served folks from over 380 different tribal backgrounds in that particular fiscal year. So we have a very diverse urban Native community here in Portland, and that means their needs are diverse.
Isn't that amazing? Over 300 tribes represented in the Portland area. Here's that QR code again. This is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small or how big. That's the end of our program. Thanks for watching. Remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.